Welcome to CIO Academy's Thought Leadership Interview Series, #Unplugged.
I'm Andrew Milroy, Principal Advisor at CIOACademyasia. In today's edition of #Unplugged, we will be talking about managing mission-critical workloads in the cloud. For the discussion today, I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Ng, Vice President, Digital Platform Operations at Mediacorp, and Cherian Varghese, Regional Managing Director, ASEAN and South Asian Growing Economies for Oracle. The COVID-19 crisis is accelerating the migration of workloads to the cloud. Today's work demands the flexibility, scalability, and agility provided by cloud services. What we're also seeing is that mission-critical workloads are shifting to the cloud at a faster rate than before. Steve, perhaps we can start with you. You mentioned earlier that over 90% of Mediacorp's applications are already in the cloud. What were the key factors which motivated you to embark on this cloud journey? And do you think that this is making you more resilient during the current COVID-19 crisis?
Yes, for Mediacorp, the key direction for us is really about our audience who consumes our content. So naturally, the cloud is actually the right position for us. Reason being that since we have a lot of users accessing our web properties, our video and audio properties, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to host it on in-house in our data center. Reason being that then we have to manage the bandwidth and all kinds of things. And when we scale, we really have a challenge because when you look at some of the content that we have, they are very situational. Say, for instance, it's the Olympics, right? And also World Cup. All those things, they only come during a season and it's very periodic, right? When it happens, we see a huge spike. But when it doesn't happen, then it basically go back to normal. So cloud actually has one of the very great characteristic of it, which is elasticity, right? It allows us to scale as we go and also allow us to return back to a normal form, right? And reduce our costs based on the natural traffic that we experience. So that is actually the choice that we have made.
And do you think in this crisis it's made you particularly more resilient? Do you think it's made you better able to work than if those applications of those workloads weren't on the cloud?
Yes, actually, in the cloud, for this situation of COVID-19, it actually makes a lot of sense and actually helps us to scale even more. Say, for instance, before February, our content access was probably at 1x. Take it as a baseline. And in February onwards until May, we're seeing like a 2.5x increase in traffic. So if we are not in the cloud, it poses us a lot of challenge because we do not have access to increase in the networking part of things. If you're on the data center, your provisioning will take a long time, right? In the cloud, basically we scale, we just pay as we use. So that actually helps to elevate the kind of requirements from the user perspective on our workload.
Great, thanks so much for that, Steve. So over to you, Cherian. From an Oracle perspective, can you give us some examples of how having workloads in the cloud have made your customers more resilient during this crisis?
Thank you, Andrew, for having me on the call. I think it's great to share, and thank you once again. Citing straight to an example about how workloads have shifted, especially during this scenario, what a great platform to say about it, because we're right now on Zoom as a platform, and I give an example of Zoom. Zoom already was on provider A for quite some time over the period of years, and then suddenly started this huge influx of people started to use Zoom in a big way as soon as COVID hit. From work from home, educational institutes started to do the online training. And just to give you one simple fact, at one point of time, the request came to 300 million users a day. Okay, so 300 million meetings happening globally. I think this is a classical example which I thought that changed Oracle's way of positioning itself. They signed up on Oracle. We were able to scale exactly the same way what Steve said. We're not sure, maybe post-COVID things might not be so, not so many cross meetings on Zoom. Mm-hmm. Maybe it might reduce, but I think the very spectrum that's starting on a factor X and moving 300x, and really the cloud providers like Oracle have to stand up and deliver something. And that's why I really take good privilege to say that we were able to do that and help Zoom overcome this huge magnitude of meetings. Another very, looks like those were the classical examples. I just read about another example, again, Oracle helping Workloads in another provider called 8x8 in the US, very common, very popular video conferencing facility. Another similar examples, a lot of online meetings, quick time, agility to do, and you're talking about getting up and running in 2 or 3 days, and moving an entire platform of millions of customers. So great stories. I love how this lift and shift happened and how it supported hundreds and thousands of concurrent users in this platform.
So Cherian, how can cloud operations management help organizations to make the most of their cloud resources from your perspective and the perspective of your customers?
Typically, cloud operations were mostly around agility. It was mostly around availability. Availability was the key word as far as cloud operations were concerned. Yeah, I have a certain spike. I have an event which is running. I need more resources. So let's spike in some CPUs and that's it. But I think this the current scenario opened up two or three important aspects about what is the contingency plan for an organization? What is so important in case of a crisis like this? That's point number one. And point number two would be, if there are risks associated with the data centers which you're operating, how do I ensure that I bulletproof my data centers? How can I ensure that my cloud operations are bulletproof? I use a very simple analogy. Around a decade back, if you were building a house and you were saying, I want to put some security system around, the best what you would do is probably a few fire sprinklers and maybe a few fire extinguishers. This is how traditionally data centers used to operate, right? So they would probably have some cooling, power, a few security safeguards, mostly physical of them, and not really thinking about what are the vulnerabilities as a normal user who comes into a platform and then enter from there and create havoc in your system. So I think that enforcing or bulletproofing of your data center has become paramount to new cloud generation. So I would still say that many of the cloud operators are operating on old technologies, which we call it as Gen 1. And now it's time for cloud operators to really move into Gen 2. And when I say Gen 2, that is how can I ensure that the security is at every single layer. It's not only at the perimeter via a firewall protection or an antivirus, but imagine if somebody is already breached in and is an insider or using this large inflow of customers who are never supposed to be on your data center, now is coming in and then he tries to traverse across, whether it's database, whether it's application, whether it is the new code of development, whether it's Python, Apex, and many, many other things. So I think the fundamentals of managing, securing, and having a risk-proof operations is now the pivot of where all organizations have become really sensitive.
So Steve, on that very important security point, can you talk a little bit about security from your perspective? Has the security provided by your cloud providers been sufficient to address your needs during this crisis?
Definitely, security is the most important factor for us. Looking at the scale that we operate, just a little misconfiguration actually will damage the entire brand. Right? Looking from that, not just the brand, also the recovery and the service level. So for us, when we look at security, is all the layers, right? From infrastructure to the code, to the applications, to the settings of the environment and the various external peripheral services that we consume, right? Everything needs to be secure and monitored. So with that in mind, that also says that, the level of security knowledge and expertise is also much more demanding, right? No longer was the day that, I just need to set up my firewall and the rules and that's good enough. But now when we look at it, is that how do I look at various layers, correlate all the events and the logs that I've seen? Is there a problem? Right? Is there a vulnerability? Is there an exposure? We need people who have that kind of working knowledge to really go deep and quickly find out, is there a problem with the general environment? If yes, right, what can we backtrack and discover the evidence that says what has been done do we have an exposure? Is there a penetrator in the system, in the environment, right? And how can we seal up the gaps? So there's many layers.
Just, moving on to talk a little bit about the future, so Cherian, just following up a little bit on what you've been saying about, multi-cloud environments and the way the different providers are working with each other. How do you think the tech investment landscape will change post-COVID-19, and how do you expect to help your customers address the new scenario or the new normal or the next normal that we move into?
One of my teammates asked this question last week in a town hall to me, and I said that I've never seen something like COVID in my 25 years of working career, which I don't want to see it ever. But I can tell you my next 10 years is going to be the fastest adoption of digital transformation, which I also have never saw in 25 years. So I think that this would have been a wake-up call, the current scenario, and the digitization and the entire transformation is going to expedite things so fast. And I allude to two findings. I think the first one was KPMG, who was saying that by the 2022-23, almost 80% of people would be on cloud. Our CEO, ex-CEO, Mark Hurd, who's no longer there, he had predicted that 80% of enterprises would be on cloud by 2022 and so forth. I think all this is going to change. There is going to be an enhanced acceleration on this digital investment. Customers are going to have absolutely go on a rapid pace to move their entire digital journey to cloud providers. It could be exactly what you said. It could be a multi-pronged strategy. It could be an Oracle dominating a data space. It could be a vendor extra specializing in virtualization. It could be a competitor Y who would be doing very good in CX or ERP and so forth. So it will be a great multi-pronged layered gameplay open. But I would say the biggest beneficiary would be a customer. A customer who was probably planning to go through this whole digital journey in the next 5 years. Boards have come together to say, let's do it now. Let's do it in the next 12 months. Let's complete this so that we have got better productivity, right people, right processes, and right tools in place to go ahead with the market. And that's what I think is the future landscape going to look out for.
Thanks so much, Cherian, for that. So Steve, over to you. How do you think that your tech investments will change post-COVID-19, if at all?
For us, when we see this current situation where the demand actually outweighs all the expectation that we ever projected, we never look at scaling 3x. We always think of like, oh, every year we increase by 20-30%, which is actually a lot, right? But now when we get able to jump so high, and yet the good thing is that the architecture that we have adopted actually supports that vision and that kind of demand, which is good. But when we look at the post-COVID, we can actually do much more. What if this scales not just 3x, but 10x? How do we scale and support the platform? So we are looking at a lot of new initiatives for this year in terms of like security, which is one of the very big part. How do we actually improve the security threat detection landscape? Next is also looking at potentially using technology like AI, machine learning, to look into developing a platform that evolves later into an AI operations framework. Right? Things that allow us to look at the data that we have, look at sensory data around us that we have, the demand from the external parties to tell us what could happen in the next hour or so. So we do want to start buying more time in front of us to allow us to plan faster and have a little bit more buffer to expand, prevent, and detect anomalies that's coming in.
Thanks so much for that. So Steve and Cherian, thank you so much for your fantastic insights. I think it's clear that the COVID-19 crisis has accelerated the move towards cloud computing, and including a much faster pace of mission critical workloads moving to the cloud. So on that note, thank you very much, Steve and Cherian. That was a great discussion, and I look forward to having the opportunity to talk with you both again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to meet both of you.